Hi everyone, this is Rick and welcome back to the Seed the Startup Journey, the entrepreneurship podcast sharing the origin stories of amazing founders and their companies in short, less than 20-minute episodes. Today I'll be interviewing the co-founder and CEO of Enso Connect, Francois Gouelo. Francois went for a weekend ski trip when he found that his Airbnb key was frozen under the doormat. The host wasn't responding to his messages, and when he finally got in, he realized that there were more heating problems. This entire experience led to the creation of Enso Connect, a property management automation software that leverages smart home appliances and AI communication in order to provide a seamless experience for homeowners, property managers, and guests. Hey Francois, to start us off, can you tell us a little bit about yourself as well as your company Enso Connect?
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Francois. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Enso Connect, a home management software for the short-term rental industry. I studied at the University of Toronto. I did a double major in computer science and cognitive science, as well as a minor in Italian, just because they wouldn't let me do a minor in French. And now I'm part-time on my master's of entrepreneurship at the University of Cambridge with a focus in prop tech and real estate. So very much tied to what I'm doing at work.
And can you talk to me a little bit more about your company? Like some of the features, I feel like it requires smart home appliances. So do you kind of require your users to have that?
So there's how we started and where we're at now. And where we started, we started off as a property management software, trying to hit all of the different verticals in that software. And now we've sort of evolved, not necessarily pivoted, but sort of refocused our solution to be a communication tool in the short-term rental industry. And what I mean by that is there's really three components to it. The first one is a unified inbox. So one place where you can get your messages across Airbnb messages, email, text, WhatsApp. You can see them all in one place. The second one is the automation of communication. So scheduled messages, sending out arrival messages, welcoming the guests, or sending out checkout information, things like that, as well as a chatbot to answer some of the most basic questions. Because what we've noticed is that guests tend to ask always the same questions. What's the Wi-Fi? Is the pool open? How do I get in? It's always the same thing. And even though that information is written down on the info page of Airbnb or other platforms, they still tend to ask it at the wrong times. And then the third component is tying in the smart home devices as part of the communication tool. So feeding that within the communication with the guest to really automate the entire experience. So one of my most favorite features, I'd say, is our boarding pass, which is something that we send out as a check-in welcome. And it's just like a boarding pass for your flight that you can have in your Apple Wallet, but this is a boarding pass for your short-term rental that essentially gives you temporary access to the home and all of its devices. Now, to answer your question more directly, we don't currently provide the smart home devices to our users. And the value that we see is primarily in the guest communication side of things. But the devices, what we've noticed, especially through this pandemic, is more and more users are getting their own smart locks, getting their own noise sensors. So we're not in the direction of, giving those devices out yet, but it's definitely part of the roadmap of how we can find an easier way to get all homes connected, as that's part of our value prop.
Gotcha. Yeah, I saw the boarding pass feature as well and thought that was really cool. So how did you come up with this idea?
Yeah, so it started off in January of 2019 when I went on a ski trip with a few friends. This was really random. I have a really good friend who just sometimes he calls me for three reasons: either to go on a trip, to go for food, or to go on a trip to go for food. We're always doing crazy things like that. So we drove to Mont Tremblant, and as unprepared as I always am with these kinds of trips, booked an Airbnb on the road. And when we got there, the host didn't answer. It was pre-approved, and that's it. And there was a bit of information of how to get the key. It was supposed to be under the doormat. We get there, the key's frozen, but like under so much snow that we couldn't even find it. Eventually we did. And then we had to like heat it up with lighters. Complete mess to get in. Once we're in the unit, the heating system was like per room, or kind of. It was a bit of a mess as well. And once again, host, no answer. And when we left, there was a sort of a say that, he said that we left the windows open. I say, no, we closed them all. And it led to damages essentially in his unit. In the kitchen, some of the pipes froze. And so he came at me 4 or 5 days after checkout saying, you owe me $5,000. My kitchen's frozen. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm a student. If I call my parents right now, asking them for $5,000 to fix someone's kitchen because I went on a random ski trip when I'm supposed to be studying, this is not going to go well for me. So I'm trying to figure out solutions. And what we realized, we helped him out a bit, but we realized, he didn't communicate with us throughout the stay. And there's certain policies about when you can claim something. And 4 days after, we don't know who stayed between. So a bit of an issue there. As part of a university, I was entering this class CSC 454, which was a computer science and business class. It was the first sort of business-oriented class in my program I'd taken. And we had to come up with a solution to an entrepreneurial problem. The focus was on robotics, and I hated robotics, but I loved smart home devices. My apartment is all connected, and so I was like, I maybe I can twist it around robotics, right? And so we went through, we built out a prototype. I bought a door where we put a smart lock and showed the advantages of having smart locks on short-term rental units. And we ended up winning that class project. And shortly after, I'd gotten into University of Cambridge for a Master's of Entrepreneurship. So things got to get a bit more formal in August of 2019 when we started having conversations with Airbnb and having a real plan and building out, from prototype to MVP to actual product with people interested. And yeah, I wouldn't know when the switch happened, but it suddenly went from class project to real venture. And here we are now.
That's awesome. And so once you kind of finished your class, what was your next step? Like, I see you have a co-founder, Peter. Like, how did you meet him? How did you find him? Like, what was that initial process for you? Like,
yeah, I guess, as it started off as a class project, I was with 3 other students, and they sort of, went out and got real jobs. And because I thought, well, I kind of want to continue this. I mean, we did get $10,000, so let's make something out of it. So I was looking for co-founders, and I remember interviewing one candidate in particular who had an amazing CV. I mean, we're talking PhD with, the head of Uber technologies, and just the perfect background. But there was we didn't click on the direction of how things were supposed to go. And so I spoke to a few friends, and one of my friends, Peter, who was in my fraternity at U of T, he was working on some really interesting AI related topics. So I was like, you know what? Hey, you want to help me out and see if we can build this out together and just try it out? And so we built a few prototypes. He got into it. I got into it. Next thing you know, we're working 24/7 together. So it was just very natural. And we complemented our skills in a perfect way where it's really balanced. There's no, one person says this is the way to go and that's it. It's really a constant conflict of ideas to get to the right idea. So it's been a terrific experience. I couldn't have done it without my co-founder, that's for sure.
That's awesome. And I think it's pretty hard to find someone like that too. So since your company is very much tied with the travel industry and vacation rental, those got hit very hard during the pandemic, as you talked about a little earlier. So how did you and Enso Connect navigate through this challenge?
I'll tell you this. So on March 7th, we raised some money from the Creator Fund in the UK. I was traveling back and forth between Canada and Europe, both for school, but also for fundraising as we were starting our pre-seed round. And what happened was we just raised a tiny bit of money. And I thought, okay, well, next steps, we can leverage that as a way to show that, what we're doing is right. A couple of days later, borders start shutting down. The US closes its borders, and I'm on calls like 24/7 for like 3 days, all day long, with advisors and mentors and investor and just everyone asking me what's going on. And to be perfectly frank, I had no idea. And I think this is really important to say is no one had any idea of what was going on, whether you were in the travel industry or not. So it was a very scary and daunting procedure. I flew back to my family's place in France to sort of, stay with them as things were getting a bit hectic. And for 2 months, nothing tangible happened. We weren't able to move forward with the product. We kept building a few things, but what we focused on was having conversations with customers, figuring out what are the new challenges, what are the new problems that you guys are facing, and sort of looking at where the industry was going. And after 2 months of doing that, we settled on this communication tool because what we realized was these property managers couldn't afford to hire account managers to lead their units and manage those homes, but they still wanted to maintain their inventory for whenever, COVID is over. And so, it became a switch of what we were selling into more of a, the value prop here is lowering the operational costs of existing property managers, all while helping them maintain their inventory and scale through automation. So that was really the new pivot. And that led to some really interesting conversations with one particular customer that ended up investing the majority of that round, which led then to another investor investing and then us joining Founders Factory. And it's sort of a trickle effect there as we continued to build out the product. So Now we're entering about 50,000 units, hopefully 60 within the next couple of months, and growing, and we're still at a very early stage, that's for sure. Still figuring out how we're going to scale our current model so that we don't spend so much time developing the product per user. It was very hard for sure. And it was tough because I saw some friends' companies in the travel space die off, and, it's not always, and it wasn't their fault in any way. They had business models that made sense, just didn't make sense during COVID. But I feel like now we're out of that sort of time frame and into a new era, if you will, of travel.
For sure. So kind of along this startup journey, what would you say is your greatest fear?
Not focusing on the customer enough, and finding the right balance between the customer, the investors, the advisors, and the entire ecosystem that we're creating, even with the team. Because what I notice is in my job, sometimes I have to focus more on investors, less on team. And then other times I have to focus more on team, less on investors. And I'm doing a lot of things at the same time, and it's just figuring out where to put my efforts appropriately. So I think my biggest fear is not giving enough attention to our customers as I'm, managing these different components. Because at the end of the day, and every great successful founder says it, it's the customer that drives your product, right? If you have people that want this, I'm not talking like they need it. It's not even just like, yeah, it'd be cool to have. It's like, no, they need it to survive almost. And then you're creating real value. But if you shy away from that and you focus too much on other elements of the business, you might steer the ship in a different direction that might keep you away from those customers, or that might, sever those ties. So, but it's an adventure. So like the fear is what drives me, like it's, at the end of the day, this is what I love about entrepreneurship and building your own company is you have the power to make those decisions. And, if you want to change the strategies, pivot the product, or do something different, you can do that. You have those resources to enable that. And even better, you have a team to do that with you. So as long as you're stuck on that same vision, those fears are the fuel to get you there, if anything.
And I want to kind of follow up on, the part about customers. So like sometimes I would have ideas that I want to try out, but I'm not really sure, when I talk to customers, what kind of questions should I be asking to figure out if this idea or if this problem is actually, worth pursuing?
Yeah. So I think the biggest thing I noticed as we've been, contacting hosts and property managers and property management systems and so on, is that you don't want to ask questions based on a solution. You want to ask questions based on their problems. And so the focus of your questions should be in you understanding what problems they face. And the best way to do that is for you not to talk and for them to talk. As you hear what they have to say, you might notice that your solution, which seemed like a great idea at the time, actually doesn't really apply to them. Even though they might be interested in it, they're not going to want to pay for it. And that, unless you're building something for fun, just, why not? But if you're building a business, obviously, you're trying to generate revenue and a profit and so on. So understanding their problem, your questions should be all around that. They shouldn't be around what you're solving. So when we went out and interviewed hosts, that was like the tactic. We just went out and asked them, what are your biggest challenges? What would make your life easier? And we noticed different problems for different people. We have one user, for example, about 80 units in Vancouver. One of his biggest issues is not the fact that he has smart locks or things like that. It's that the very first step for his users to get into the building is they have to call a number, the interphone, and then he has to pick up and press a button. Which is so stupid. It's such a small thing. But then the rest of your automation is useless if you don't have that first step, right? Because the entry point into the building is blocked by this manual labor. And even though you have a smart locks after that, and you have all sorts of different tools to make the experience better after, the very first one isn't automated. So understanding those niche problems doesn't mean you have to fix them. Maybe it's not in the direction of your company. Maybe that's not the way you want to go, but being aware of those is the key there.
And what advice do you have for someone like me who is still a student, but I'm interested in entrepreneurship and wants to potentially start something of my own in the future?
To back up what we were talking about earlier, just before the podcast, I think, what Swish had mentioned about building your network is definitely important. You cannot start this by yourself. And, there are solo founders out there, but I would say it's a bigger struggle. And building that network of other tech founders or investors or advisors is going to be even more helpful to find your next strategic partnership, to find the investor, but even more importantly, to know what you're doing. If I look back at when I started Enso, uh, the 6 months of it being a school project, we could have done that in 2 weeks or a week, right? And I look back at that and I feel frustrated by it, but at the same time, I see that that's because it's a learning experience throughout the process. I didn't know those things. I didn't know what a business model canvas was at the time. Like I was a computer science major, cognitive psychology and computational linguistics. We don't do BMCs and value propositions or anything. So it's a learning process. In terms of my own advice, I would say is figure out what your passion is, and work in that field, in that path. My passion is traveling. Any excuse I can get to go somewhere, I will take it. And that's why I jumped into this industry. And also start early. There's, a lot of people push it like, you know what, I'm going to finish my undergrad and then I'll do it. Or I'll do a master's, then I'll get a job, save a bit of money and then do it. The more you push it, the less likely you're going to get to it. And one of the things I love about some of these entrepreneurs in Toronto, Swish, Saad, a bunch of young guys, is that they started even earlier than I did, and they took that risk. But by taking that risk, they've actually given themselves a much more advantageous position, because they have that, nimbleness, that time, that free time in a way, to really do anything. Whereas, if you're 30, 35, you've got a family, it's going to start becoming a bit more challenging than when you're 20 years old and the only, burden you have is making sure you pass the final at the end of the semester, really.
Speaking of finals, I have 2 to prepare for tomorrow. So yeah.
I feel, yeah, I remember.
All right. So to wrap us off, I actually prepared some rapid fire questions.
Okay.
So the first one is, if you could have a superpower, what would it be?
The power of persuasion. Actually, you know what? No, okay, because I'm thinking business right now, but I'm going to think what I would truly want personally. It's literally to fly. If I could fly, I could travel anywhere at any time, or maybe even better, teleport is even easier. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know why I'm thinking of taking the long way there. May as well just teleport, since we're talking about superpowers. Yeah, teleport. That way I could be anywhere at any time. I want to have lunch in Taipei. Boom, teleport,
And what time do you usually wake up every morning?
6. I wake up at 6 a.m. I don't like waking up early in the morning. I know people say, successful people wake up at 4 in the morning and have 3 hours of sleep. No, I think it's important to get sleep. But I do wake up early because I deal with the UK a lot. So it's important for me to get on those calls. So this morning I had a 7 a.m. meeting, and so it just means I go to bed earlier. That's it.
Yep. What's something you cannot live without?
All I really need is to ensure that I have a credit card, a passport, and a phone. If I have those 3 things, I'm fine with living anywhere, being anywhere, and doing anything. And obviously money on the credit card could be helpful as well, not just credit, but you know what I mean? Like I don't necessarily have something I'm tied to that I just cannot live without.
This is the last question, which is, what is the best advice you've ever received?
Exactly what you're doing, in fact. And so the piece of advice came from Daniel Dubois, and who's one of our advisors and mentors at Enso. He said, ask an investor for money and you will get advice. Ask an investor for advice and you will get money. And I think, it sounds kind of misleading, or, okay, so I'm going to ask this investor for advice, that way I can get his money. And that's not the point of the saying. The point of it is to get people emotionally involved in what you're doing, not to ask them for things, but to get them interested in what you're doing, because that's how they're going to self-start and help you solve different problems out of their own free will, because they believe in you and your project. So you could apply that to really anything. Ask a customer for advice and you'll have him as a customer. Ask a customer to join your platform and he might be like, well, wait a minute, and that's how you do it, right? When you have these conversations, these early conversations with a customer, you're building that relationship of trust, of transparency, that will serve you down the road. Don't always look for what you need now. Look at, what they can offer in terms of their experience, because later on they might be helpful. But focus on the experience part right now.
Yeah, I love that as well. So that's it for today's interview. Thank you, Francois, for taking the time to do this. And I wish you the best of luck.
Yeah, thank you so much, Rick. Really appreciate it.